and through just one scene, the show has already found a way to up the stakes in what is sure to be an extremely riveting penultimate season. Hey guys, remember the season premiere of The Americans, Season 5, Episode 1, Amber Waves, and I was obviously hyped out of my mind for this premiere. As you guys know, I always look forward to The Americans, which was my favorite show of last year. It was such an incredible season. That was really the thing for this season, is my big thing was, can they really top, last season? Because last season was so big. We had two major deaths. We had so many incredible directions of the show, underwent like a time jump and things like that. So I really didn't know what the season was really going to be like, especially because, as we know, this is the penultimate season. The stakes are going to be a lot higher, and if there's one thing that this premiere definitely tells us is that they're going in a completely different direction, and the show really is all the better for it, because what we thought was going to happen in Season 4 was not at all what turned out to happen, in this premiere, which I was very happy about. I really love this premiere overall. Such an incredible start, already completely hooked into everything that's going on, and I can't wait to see really where we're going to go. But let's just get into this premiere, because a lot definitely did happen. There definitely is a lot to talk about, and I definitely really did love this one. So we start off, and it was kind of jarring the way we start off, but it was jarring in a good way, not in a bad way. The Americans has a way of, making you feel like you missed something, or making you feel like, you're being thrown to something else, and I really love the way they did that. So we start off at a high school. There's this kid named Tuan, who we don't know who exactly this kid is, but he joins a kid at a lunch table named Pasha. Now, at first, I was a bit confused. I thought this had to do with, Philip's kid. I thought that's really what this was all about, but they're both new at the school, and Pasha's English is very, very shaky, because he's just recently transferred from Moscow, and Tuan, on the other hand, I believe he said it was from Michigan or something like that, and, he just moved 2 months ago, so obviously things aren't great for him. But after school, he brings his friend Pasha home to hang out, but his parents in the kitchen turn out to be Phillip and Elizabeth, and this was such a brilliant way to start off the show, because at this point, we are completely confused. I mean, I really had no idea what was going on here. I'm like, was there a time jump? Is there something else going on, Phillip and Elizabeth, that we don't know about? Did they go to Russia? There was a lot of stuff that there was a lot of stuff here that very much throws us off, and it very well hooks us in to the show. And I really did love the way this episode starts. That they do such a great job of hooking you into the show and really getting you into the characters. And on a lesser show, this would be weird if they did that, but on this show, it really did heighten where we went with this episode, because at this point we don't know what's really going on here. They've made a very bold decision to start it off in this way. But Stan then heads to work at the FBI office, and his boss calls him into his office and announces that Oleg did in fact board a plane last night and flew back to Moscow. And basically we realize that we're picking up right where the finale left off, which I was very happy about. And Stan doesn't know how this all happened. He had this bond with Oleg and everything. But after that incredible opening, we are then thrown back into the action when we see Stan, and we realize that it's actually only been a day since the end of the season, which I was quite surprised about, because the way the first scene happened, I thought it was like, a couple months or a year, but no, it's really only been a day. And again, it's really interesting, just a lot of this realizing what Philip and Elizabeth have been up to just in a day. I mean, it's quite interesting. But basically, he heads to work at the FBI office. His boss calls him into his office and announces that Oleg boarded a plane last night and he flew back to Moscow. And obviously, Stan's kind of upset about this, but he's also kind of relieved, because remember, him and Oleg were working together. But he doesn't know why Oleg left. Obviously he's very much thrown off by it. He doesn't understand, how this happened, and I thought they made a good decision in keeping Oleg on the show. We'll get into that in a second, but Oleg is still going to be on the show. I'm happy about that. I like that they do still have stuff for him to do, but we definitely do get into this idea. As I said last season, this is probably going to be Stan's most desperate season yet. I mean, he's doing whatever he can to try to find this couple at this point, and Oleg was going to be someone that was going to get him closer to that. Like, he really did see him as a linchpin, because, William didn't budge. I mean, I said it before, if William would not have died when he did, he probably would have given them a lot more answers. But because he died, Oleg was going to be his link to, everything that the KGB was going through. But now that he's gone, Stan's very much, lost now. He doesn't really know what to do, and I really did like seeing, you can definitely tell that unsatisfaction that Stan really feels throughout this episode. So, Elizabeth and Philip then head to their fake house to check on Tuan, and apparently we find out he's a spy for them. Obviously, they're not really his parents, they're just kind of pretending at this point, and he's basically a spy for them. Pasha is his mark, we find out. He's trying to get information on him, and Elizabeth and Philip are interested in Pasha's father, which apparently is possibly a Russian traitor that fled the country. So a lot of this is very interesting, because obviously you're wondering what is so interesting about Tuan. Well, it's not so much Tuan, it's that Tuan is just another, he's another, he's going to be another informant for them, in a long line of different informants. Tuan is going to be their next one. So that's why he's going after Pasha. It's all kind of this act to do that. And like I said, that whole storyline is very interesting. I think it really does add a lot of stakes to this season, which I really do like seeing. So, basically, we go to Moscow, where Oleg is home with his mother. She's thrilled to have him back from the U.S., and she confesses that she misses his brother terribly. And I like that we got to see Oleg in Moscow. We heard so much last season about Oleg's mother and how she's really not doing well. And to see him back here, not only does it say a lot about Oleg, but they are still keeping things interesting here. Basically she hasn't been sleeping or doing well since he passed away, so this is probably going to be a very tragic season for Oleg, considering the condition his mom's in. It's very sad to see, but it definitely does open a lot more possibilities for his character. I'm definitely interested in seeing where they're going to go with this character overall, and I can't wait to see what ends up happening with this character throughout the rest of the season. So after almost 10 minutes of entirely new information and new surroundings, we're finally thrown back into a familiar surrounding, of course, that being the Jennings home, which, again, was just this incredibly adventurous move that the show really took. You would think that the show, the interesting stuff we want to see is with Paige. The cliffhanger of season 4 had to do with Paige and their decision to go to Russia and everything that Paige is doing. So the fact they didn't do that till 10 minutes in really did show how fearless the show really is, and that's one of the many reasons why the show is really as good as it is. But they return to their real home. They're cooking dinner for their actual kids, and Paige then returns home, and she's really not hungry at all because she has dinner at Stan's house with him and his teenage son. And we realize that in that time that she's been with Matthew, she's been getting a lot closer with him. Because of that, she's not really at home a lot. She's with Matthew and Stan. She just feels more comfortable there. Why? Because it finally gives her that sense of a normal life. I've said it so many times before. That's the thing that Paige really wants. I think she knows deep down she's not going to be able to, have that normal life, but she's trying to acquire as much of a normal life for as long as she can, because she knows she's not going to be able to have one for that long, and that's why she's spending so much time there. And it's sad to see that Elizabeth and Philip are kind of losing control of her, and that they can't really do what they want with her. But at the same time, you're happy for Paige. You want her to be that normal teenager. You want her to live that normal life. And again, there's just so much interesting stuff going on there. And once we find out what the actual mission of the KGB is, this scene becomes a lot more vital to the show than we think it is. But the other interesting thing about this episode is that throughout the show, we're also focusing on Mischa, or Mikhail, whatever you want to call him, of course, that being Philip's adult son. We did, in fact, see him at the end of Season 4, and I didn't really know where he was going to stand here. I didn't know if that was just going to be a precursor to something we'd eventually get in the show, or if we were going to see him right away, and we actually did. Throughout this episode, we see him. He's headed to the United States to track him down, because as we know, he's now gone out of that medical facility, or the mental, wherever he was, and he's a nervous wreck, waiting to go through customs, things like that, because he's never done this before. His English really isn't that great. He's not used to America. It's a whole new situation for him, and that's a story that I am definitely very invested in. I don't exactly know where they're going with it. Eventually he is going to track down Philip. It's just right now I don't really know where they're going. There's not really a ton I can say, but that intercut with everything else that was going on was very interesting. Again, it really does. It's another obstacle that Philip and Elizabeth are going to have to overcome, and it's going to make their life a lot more complicated. Knowing the show's doing that, again, opens this door for another very interesting storyline. I love the way the show is doing that, and this show really does understand continuity quite well in a way that other shows don't. I've said this many times before, and this is definitely a prime example of that. So the next day, Tuan takes his fake parents, Phillip and Elizabeth, to his friend Pasha's house to have dinner with his parents, and over dinner we find out quite a lot of information, which this is actually very interesting because a lot of people have said that, I've heard it many times before, that the show is spy espionage and that they always do the same thing. A lot, and yeah, I mean, for the past 4 seasons, that's what it's been. It's always been, acquire information or, protect the CIA or make sure that Russians aren't exposed. But this season, we're dealing with a much more pressing and I think much more concerning situation. I mean, the situation that's here is much more, this is a situation that really is life or death. I mean, it's a much more important and definitely, it's a much more crucial decision that I definitely did like hearing about. But basically, Pasha's dad talks about where he lived in the Soviet Union and how horrible it was and really how bad the conditions were. And remember, they feel this guy is a traitor, that he really is not with the Russians. But he explains that he works for the U.S. government, he's a consultant, and he gets paid to tell them all about what life is like in the Soviet Union. So I thought that was definitely interesting to find out about, but we also find out a couple more things here, that apparently there's a food shortage currently going on, and the Russians think that the CIA is in fact responsible for it, and they kind of feel like Pasha's dad might also be responsible for it, and that whole thing, that is exactly how you shake up the show, because for 4 seasons now, we've seen them, and yes, there's been some really riveting stuff, but for the most part, it's been a lot of the same, track down this person, or make sure this person doesn't try to, doesn't find out your KGB, things like that. This is a lot different than that, and I'm very happy the show's doing that. I really do love this situation, like I said, it's a lot more paramount than that of, what's going on, with the first 4 seasons. Now we have something that is very much a life or death situation. This could be really bad for anyone involved, and it's even worse than the whole liquefy thing going on last year. I mean, that was definitely, obviously a bad situation, but this is definitely way worse, and I'm definitely interested in seeing really where we're going to go with this. There are a lot of places they can take this story, and I really do love the way they're shaking up the show in that sense. And when you get to that scene with Paige, eating with Stan, it really does make sense why they're showing that, because the main theme of the season is going to be food, and what better way to represent the family than having food around a dinner table. There's just something so wholesome about it, and by throwing a knife into that, by talking about how they might not get that food that they need, and they might be discounted on, especially the fact that we know that Phillip and Elizabeth are probably going to be exposed this season, at least I'm assuming they're going to be, and this could end up being a way worse situation than we think, and I can't wait to see where they're going to go with that. So Paige then shows up at Stan's door, which is basically a routinal thing for her. She's here a lot, and he says Matthew's in the shower. While they're waiting for Matthew, he thanks Paige for being such a great friend to Matthew, making his transition to his dad's house so much easier, because as we know, they've been through a lot. I mean, Stan, recently divorced Sandra, and since then, Matthew's been staying at the house, and that's how Paige and Matthew have been getting so much closer. And again, you can just see that Paige feels a lot more at home here. She's finally happy with her surroundings. She doesn't feel like there's as much pressure, because there isn't as much pressure. I mean, constantly Phillip and Elizabeth are telling her not to get involved, or not to do this, or not live the life of a normal teenager, and this is the place where she gets to feel somewhat normal, even though she knows she can't. It's just very, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, the situation that she's in. It's just really bad, what's going on with her, and I definitely am loving where Paige is going. I said it last season that was definitely Paige's most problematic season, but I think this season really is going to be that. You can tell she wants to live that life, and she just can't, and she's definitely starting to realize that, but at the same time, she doesn't want to, she wants to continue to have that normal life, so it's really not the best situation for her, but they then return to their real home, and Paige is getting home from Stan's again, and Phillip isn't thrilled about her dating Stan's son, because these two are dating at this point. This isn't like her just going over to Matthew. They're dating, and, Phillip obviously isn't happy with this. He's trying to convince her that she should check out some other guys her age, but Paige doesn't want to talk about him, and I don't think it's because that she doesn't want them to know about him. I think it's because she wants to make sure she's with Matthew. Matthew is someone she genuinely trusts. Matthew is someone she can actually talk to as a real teenager, and she just doesn't feel comfortable talking to her parents about because she's constantly pressured about not being able to go to the Beemans. And she tells her parents that she has bigger problems, and basically we find out that ever since she saw Elizabeth kill that man, she hasn't been able to sleep. She's constantly having nightmares about her doing that, and that is very understandable. As we know, she did not know the weight and the real ferocity of what Elizabeth and Philip were doing until she saw Elizabeth kill that man. Ever since then, she's been replaying it in her head over and over again, thinking this is something that she's going to have to do, and it's so bad she can't even really talk to them about it. And Holly Taylor, again, what an incredible job in this scene. You can really feel the fear in her and just the reaction that she had to this. I mean, this is clearly one of the most concerning things she's ever really gone through. She's never really gone through something like this before. She never really wanted to see her parents as killers, but now that she knows they are, it's much harder to talk to them, but it's definitely understandable because of the way they are, because of the situation they're in. Obviously, it's a lot harder for her to talk to them. It's a lot harder for them to get any sort of, reaction out of her, and in general, it's just a very tough situation right now. I'm definitely interested in seeing what's going to happen there, because it definitely is showing that as things are, as Paige is getting herself further and further into the KGB, it's really starting to strain her, relationship with her parents, and it's very sad to watch, but at the same time, there's really nothing they can do about it. They kind of brought it on themselves, and now they kind of have to deal with those consequences. It's clear that Philip and Elizabeth, when they told Paige about this, they never really thought of Paige, resenting them or wanting nothing to do with them. This is the real reason why they never wanted to tell her, because they knew this is the kind of reaction that she had, but now this is starting to become the reality, and it's really all too much for them to handle, but at the same time, there's really nothing they can do about it, and it definitely is quite sad to watch, but again, it very is much the inevitable direction that the show is headed in. So Stan stops by to have a beer with Philip, and he's thrilled about Paige and Matthew's budding relationship, and Philip does a really great job having to pretend in this scene and having to act like, everything's fine and that he is on good terms with Stan. He's always done this, but especially now it's crucial. Like, he needs to do whatever he can to try to stay as, low-key as possible in terms of how he really is, with his fear about this stuff. So, especially because, as we know, Stan knows there's a married couple out there. So, he fills Philip in on this hot new girl he saw at the gym and wants to ask out on a date, and I don't know if we're going to see much of that, but it is good to see this friendship is still there, because honestly, I don't think we're going to get much more of it. I think this is going to be one of the last times we see that friendship. I mean, it's inevitable that Stan finds out what happens. That's going to happen at some point in the show, and when that happens, that's really going to change the friendship between Philip and Stan, which again is very sad to watch, but very well is setting up the beginning of the end, I have to say. So the next day, Elizabeth then confronts Paige. She says she's going to make her nightmares go away, and she takes Paige to the garage, and she then begins shoving her. Now, a lot of very, violent encounters and different sort of happenings have happened in the garage, and they've been, the garage has really been this symbolism for the show. The garage is where all the intensity, all of the violence, all of that goes down. I remember Paige was going through the garage back in season 2, trying to figure out what was going on there, and now that she knows, this really is a dangerous place for her, and Paige is very confused as to why Elizabeth is shoving her. But Elizabeth begins teaching her how to defend herself and fight off any potential attackers. Remember, Paige said she wanted to fight. Paige said she wants to be treated, like she should be in the KGB, because she knows that's going to inevitably happen. It's not because she wants that. It's because she wants to be prepared. She knows exactly what's going to happen to her. She knows at some point she's going to have to get involved, even though she doesn't really want to. And again, it's a lot for one kid. You can definitely tell. So later that evening, when Philip is decrypting a message, Elizabeth tells him about Paige's lesson, and definitely things are, like I said, a lot more complicated for these two. They're doing whatever they can to try to help out Paige, but there's really only so far they can go with this, and the real question is going to be, how long are they really going to be able to go through this with Paige? We'll have to see what ends up happening there. So, in Moscow, Oleg heads to his first day at his new job. He meets with his boss, who is a colonel, who explains the details of what his job really entails. He'll be handling criminal investigations, and again, we hear about the food shortage and things like that, so we don't really know where that's going to go. We'll have to see. So Elizabeth and Phillip then finally meet up with Gabriel at the safe house. He tells them that he thinks that they know what happened to William, because remember, they don't know that William's died. They weren't there when he died and everything. That was all Stan and Outerholt. They were the ones that saw him die. They have no knowledge of this. And basically, after he infected himself with Lassa fever, he was detained at Fort Diedrich, where he died. And the handler pulls out a map of Fort Diedrich, and basically, we then get to an extremely riveting ending, which this ending is just incredible. The Americans really knows how to handle, scenes like this very well, and this is a very good example of, how they handle these sort of like very riveting sort of cover-up scenes. And it very much reminded me of the suitcase scene in season 3. Remember when Phillip had to kill Annalise? He didn't want to, but he had to. And we had that whole scene with the suitcase where he was cracking her bones and everything. This very much reminded me of that. Only it's almost completely silent, which was a very smart choice for the show to do. It found a way to keep us invested without any sort of dialogue going on, because they head to Fort Diedrich in the middle of the night. They meet up with 4 other operatives, all dressed all in black, and basically they cut down a chain link fence. They sneak in the back of the fort in the dark. They spend the entire night digging up a grave in the back of the fort, and they finally reach a coffin, and they find William's body inside, wrapped in plastic, and he uses a scalpel. He cuts a hunk of flesh off from dead William's leg, puts it into a plastic bag, doing whatever they can to extract of the body. And while they're preparing to put the grave back together, one of the men, Hans, falls in the hole. Now, if you remember Hans, this was someone who Elizabeth definitely did have quite a close relationship with. We didn't see him as much in season 4, but we definitely did see him in season 3. And I like the way the show, again, makes note of Hans. Not a huge character. This is not a main character or anything like that. But he is a character that we very much cared about, because, again, he is with the KGB, and he is someone that Phillip and Elizabeth have worked with before. So we immediately do know who he is. And he ends up cutting his hand open. He lands on William's body, and there's a good chance he's been contaminated, obviously, because the Lassa fever, as we know, is extremely contagious. So one of the men shoots him in the head. They basically have to make the decision to kill him, and Elizabeth, has this moment here where she doesn't know if she wants to kill him. She's been so close with Hans, she doesn't know if she should actually do this, or she should actually just shoot him and end it. But one of the men has to do it for her. They end up killing him. They toss him in the coffin, William, just to be on the safe side. And it's a very tragic and very unfortunate end to what is definitely a very sad, saddening premiere that very well does set up the show. But that is the way this episode ends. Let's just get this episode and where we're going to go this season. So, wow, what an incredible premiere. The Americans really does know how to do it when it comes to starting off a season, and this was an incredible way to do that, because while a lot of the season does definitely have some familiar conflicts, there's a lot of change going on, especially when it comes to the food shortage, just like Lassa, what played a big role last season. Lassa was the main thing they had to deal with, and this season has to do with the food shortage. I think that definitely is very interesting. And they did a very good job with doing whatever they could to get away from the Lassa story, because that was last season. That's not the main goal this season. The end of that is by getting rid of William's body. By doing that, they will finally get rid of this Lassa virus, because it was so contagious, and by disposing of his body in the way they did, they were able to do that. But so much incredible stuff just in that one scene. There's so much pathos, especially with Elizabeth. A lot of people, there are many scenes in the show where Elizabeth makes a lot of decisions, and she doesn't seem to care that much, and she doesn't seem to have much of a heart. But, and we see in the scene, this is one of those few moments where she almost has this realization where she really doesn't want to do this. She doesn't want to have to kill Hans, but she did, and that was just an incredible way to show that. I loved the way that scene was done, and it really shows what the Americans does with character, and what it really does with putting them in these very violent, but, vital situations that they just kind of have to take action. It's one of those, like, fight or flight things, and there really was no other thing that they could have done but kill him. They had to. He was infected, and if they didn't, then the virus would have been passed to someone else, and it would have gone all over again. So that is basically the thing that finally does end the virus for good, and we'll have to see what goes on with that. But as far as everything else that's going on, there's a lot of stuff definitely going on this season. Now let's talk about this whole food shortage situation, because I think this definitely is quite interesting. One, not only is the food shortage going to play a big role in the season, but it definitely is a reflection of the family overall. I mean, if you guys can't tell, the family really is breaking apart. I mean, rarely are Paige and Henry going to Phillip and Elizabeth. Really are they really treating them like their parents. Henry especially rarely talks to Phillip and Elizabeth anymore. I mean, he's still in the dark about so many things, and I'm pretty sure that's going to change this season. No doubt that's definitely going to happen at some point. He's going to have to figure out what's going on. I mean, it's either going to be him or Stan. They're going to figure out at some point. They're both going to figure out, before the show ends, but Henry kind of has to figure out, like, really soon. I don't know how that's going to go, but Paige especially, we can tell, is very much distancing herself from Phillip and Elizabeth, because while she does want to be trained and while she does want to be prepared, it's still a lot to put on one kid. I mean, she really just wants to be that normal kid and have that normal life. Phillip even talks about how he wishes that her only conflict was having to be with Matthew and having to have this relationship and just the regular struggles a teenager does. But they can't change what it is. They already told her what's going on. They knew the consequence was going to happen, and now that's starting to really bite them in the ass. And it's honestly completely understandable why that's starting to have such an effect on them, because obviously Paige isn't okay with what they're doing. She's not okay with killing. She's not okay with them keeping these secrets and things like that. And now there aren't any more secrets. And now that a lot of it has, now that it's really been pulled from under the rug, now she really doesn't look at them in the same way anymore. And it's really sad to watch, but at the same time, she knows she has to get involved. And it's a very complex situation. I'm definitely interested in seeing really what's going to happen there. I think Paige essentially is going to have to be forced to not have this normal life, even though she really wants to. But I really do love the way that she's trying to do, have as much of one as she still can, because there is that fear that they are going to have to go back to Russia. And I don't know if Phillip and Elizabeth have discussed this with her. I don't think they have, but I think she has in her mind that this is temporary and that she's not going to have this life forever. Eventually, she's going to be forced to do what her parents do, even though she doesn't want to do it. It's the inevitable thing to do, and it really to show how smart and tenacious she really is when it comes to that stuff. So I'm really interested in seeing what's going to happen with that, because I think that storyline is definitely quite sad to watch. But the other big thing going on, of course, is Philip's son. We now know that, Mikhail is transferring to the United States, even though he doesn't really understand, what it all means and what's really going to happen there. I think that whole story is very interesting as well. And it's a very good frame story. Like, the season is very much a frame story. We have a couple things going on, Mikhail and with Oleg, where he is, on his way to Phillip and Elizabeth, while Oleg is in his own place in Moscow, which I'm sure that's going to eventually connect to what's going on. And I'm pretty sure Stan is eventually going to track him down, because, like I said, that really was Stan's view into the KGB. He is, in fact, a KGB operative. He worked with the KGB, and I love how they were able to tell that he was KGB. Like, even his boss knew he was KGB. It's really not hard for Oleg to hide. This is something he's done for pretty much his entire, for a very long portion of his life. If it's not his entire life, it's definitely been a long portion of his life. And now that as well is starting to have a negative effect on him. But at the same time, definitely that's going to play a role in this food shortage, which let's get into Tuan, who I already am very fascinated by this character. The show really knows how to pick really small characters that in a lesser show would probably just be delegated to just being a placeholder, very disposable characters who just, they get disposed and we don't feel much about them. But just like when Hans died, if something bad happens to Tuan, I genuinely feel I'm going to be concerned for him, because Tuan is someone who's in this situation, but he clearly, again, he wants to have that normal life. He wants to be a teenager. He wants to have this friendship with Pasha, but he knows he's not supposed to. And Phillip and Elizabeth, we don't really know where this is going to go, if Pasha's father is responsible for what's going on. They feel he's a traitor. I don't think it's that simple. I think there's a lot more parts to this than they think, and we'll have to see what happens there, because I think that's going to be very interesting as well, as to what's really happening with, what's really going down with Pasha's father, because definitely he has a lot of animosity for the United States, and I think a lot of that definitely is earned. You can understand why he feels the way, because there definitely are a lot of limits that they have. But if he's working with them, I mean, I definitely mentioned seeing how that's going to work because it doesn't really seem like he holds much, much sort of care or anything like that for them. So I don't know what's going to happen there. We'll have to see. And then as far as Oleg's mother, I mean, time's really running out for her. Oleg's only got so much time left with her. It's sad to think about, but the clock really is ticking in terms of how long Oleg's mother really does have, and it's going to be very sad when she eventually does die, but it's going to happen. I mean, that's something that I think he knows, and, that's why he is away where he is, and I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen there. But overall, guys, really was an incredible premiere. I absolutely loved what the show did here, and I think this season in general, it can be summed up in this one scene where Claudia is actually back in the picture with Gabriel, and they even talked about how, Phillip and Elizabeth, they're scared of everything, but they're also scared of nothing, and I think that very well sums up the season. They know what can happen, but they have to act like it doesn't affect them, and that's why Gabriel thinks that nothing really scares them, but Gabriel why that's why Claudia thinks that, but that's why Gabriel knows deep down that stuff does affect them. He's been with them for the harder stuff. Claudia was with them for the beginning of it, but he was with them for the smaller stuff. He was with them for the stuff that really has impacted them, like telling Paige, like having to go through this Lassa virus. I mean, a lot of this has had a huge impact on them, and it really is starting to break not just them but the family apart. It's very sad to think about, but it really is very well setting up the final season of the show. This is probably the best premiere the Americans has ever done. Honestly, I really did love this premiere overall. There's so much great stuff going on here. There's so much at stake. They really are doing a great job of shaking things up, and I really do love the way the show is doing that. And I'm definitely going to give the season premiere of the Americans, Season 5, Episode 1, Amber Waves, a 4.75 out of 5 or an A. So far, guys, for me, this episode of The Americans. Let me know what you guys saw this episode overall. Left your thoughts on it. I absolutely am already loving this season. I can't wait to see where the show is going to go. I can't believe that they only have 2 seasons left, but there's just so much that can happen in this season. There's so many possibilities, and I'm pretty sure the show is going to take note of a lot of those things, especially, with Philip's son venturing to the United States and what have you. But that's in my review. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for the season of Underground. Underground, I'm binging the season. It comes back tonight, so I'm going to try to review that for you guys, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.